fellow Garden Club members and very welcome guests. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who in truth needs no introduction. She's a true professional and a great artist. Her credentials are impeccable, her creations peerless, and her teaching ability legendary. I personally want to thank her for agreeing to do this for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you our own Adrienne Green.
The tradition of placing flowers in receptacles is not new. The evidence is there in murals on Egyptian tombs, in Byzantine mosaics, and Persian carpets, which many of you have, and also in Indian, Chinese, and Japanese art of all kinds. Today, though, the trend is to think of flower arranging as one of the visual arts. And as such, it is related to painting, architecture, and other arts. I am going to, this afternoon, talk about today's flower arrangements and relating them that you already know, and also we will look back to the traditions of the past. In our first design, we are going to think about the European tradition. Actually, we will go back to the ancient Greeks, whose idea of beauty was based on the human form, on you, for example. The symmetrical balance. I am using an old Italian alabaster container, which is very heavy. And in the container, I have placed oasis. I like to use the very heavy deluxe oasis if I'm going to have many flowers. And we hope that it doesn't collapse. The oasis is my only mechanic, and I've taped it down, which you can see if you look carefully, with floral tape. It's called tuck tape. Some of the material that I am using is from different parts of the world. This beautiful leucodendron from Bill Teague is called Uglanosa, and I think it is wonderful. And look at it with the container. The relationship is so beautiful. In the European tradition, we will be doing a massed arrangement. As we work, we will talk about how the design guidelines help us to achieve beauty and harmony. Now, these are the same design principles which are used in all other forms of art. I'm going to start my arrangement, and I said that this was based on the human body, symmetrical balance, by placing my first placement in the center of the container. The arrangement is going to go on the tea table. You are looking up at it, I'm looking down at it, you'll be looking down at it on the tea table. Therefore, I am not going to make it terribly tall, because actually the perspective will be different when you look at it on the tea table. I'm going to place this in the center of the container, and I'm really going down deep because I want it to be nice and straight. The elements of design that we use are space and line and light, form and pattern and texture and color. And in order to succeed with these design elements, we apply the design principles. I have divided space with one line, and now I'm going to give the arrangement a couple of arms, just like you. You have arms. And I'm going to put one on one side and one on the other. Notice that I'm cutting these the same length. And I'm putting one on one side of our central axis to go down and embrace the container. And the distance from here to here should be pretty much the same. And you tell me if it's right. Looks pretty good. Now we will also place a couple of pieces of material in the front and in the rear using the Uglonosa, cutting these a little bit shorter because the table is a rectangular table, and we'll put one on one side. If you notice, the arrangement already has taken form or shape. It is a kind of a pyramid, isn't it? Now we will begin to fill in our pyramid, strengthening the line a little bit, and I also have some nice material from Bill Teague. It's a very tiny eucalyptus, and I thought it would be pretty as another green in the arrangement, so we'll add a little bit of the eucalyptus to strengthen our line. It gives us a little bit of contrast. If you look at the arrangement, even now you can notice that there are empty spaces and solid spaces. This is the pattern or the silhouette of the design. Now we'll think about some of our flowers, and we have a few. Because it is autumn, I thought it would be nice to use chrysanthemums. When you cut chrysanthemums for an arrangement, it's a good idea to start from the bottom. If you start from the bottom, it gives you a little bit more length. Notice how I'm cutting, because I want the buds to be at the top. And I will start on my main line with the chrysanthemums and keep following along. The texture of the design is also something to think about. When we think about texture, we think about the surface quality. And I'll keep turning this around so you'll have something to look at as I work from side to side. The texture of the chrysanthemums is a little bit different from the rather velvety texture of the Uglonosa. Isn't that a wonderful word? You'll never forget it. Now we will have a little change and use some of the kind of fluffy field-grown mums. The next design element that we think about is color. And certainly we all respond to color. In design, it is easier, I feel, to work in closely related colors rather than mixing too many kinds and colors. You will notice that we are working in yellow primarily, and we will work in some of the carnations now, and we will work in some of the lilies a little bit later. The little miniature carnations are quite charming. They do best in mass arrangements, I feel, rather than alone, and we are using them in our mass. And we will add a few up at the top. I'll turn it around so that you can see what I'm doing. So the design elements that are used in flower design are space, and when we talk about space, we think about the space the arrangement is going to occupy. We also think about the spaces in between each flower. And the spaces in the flowers, among the flowers. We like to have depth in flower arrangements, so we like to have spaces inside. And one way to help this depth is to put in a little bit of dark green down low. This is camellia foliage that I'm using, and I'm going to tuck a little bit behind some of the lilies. And also the forward and backward look in a design helps your eye go inside. And I'll turn this around in a minute and you can see what happens with the camellia foliage. We will be adding other kinds also, but that dark green adds a note of richness to the entire design. So light is another design element that is extremely important, because without light we could not see the color of the flowers. And certainly this extra lighting today helps a great deal. And we will continue adding flowers as we go down, and also a little bit more of our beautiful green, which is the uglanosa, a type of leucodendron that is new to me. The design principles of proportion and scale and balance and dominance and contrast and rhythm are also very, very important. As we work, we must think about these principles in order to succeed. Proportion deals with the amounts and areas, the amount of green, for example, in relation to the amount of yellow, the amount of lilies in relation to the amount of chrysanthemums, for example. Amounts and areas. Scale, closely related to proportion, is a size relationship. Deals with the relative sizes of the things that we are using. The plant material I feel that I am using is well scaled one to another. I do not feel that the large football mums would have been in scale, and I think you would agree with that. Balance is visual stability. In other words, this is symmetrical balance. Pretty much what's on one side is on the other side. But it is very boring if we have our symmetrical balance exact. And if you study some of the lovely Dutch Flemish paintings, and I think too of the mosaics in Los Angeles, the Gilbert mosaics, the floral designs on some of the tables, the designs are symmetrically balanced, but they are not mirror images. And they are, in that way, even more beautiful and more interesting. So we try not to have an exact mirror image. It is said that the Dutch and Flemish painters sometimes took years to finish a canvas. I never knew this until I read it at the Getty Museum. That's my authority. Because I thought that the flowers were probably not painted from life. But supposedly, the Dutch and Flemish masters, many of them, would have several canvases in production at the same time. And as the seasons changed, they would get the flowers and add the correct flowers. I'm trying to put some flowers forward and some flowers back to carry your eye into the design so that the design will have depth. Now that side's done, and I'll finish this side. If you have only a few flowers, maybe you're doing something for the church and you don't have many flowers, always work the center of the arrangement first, because that is what people are most conscious of. And if you don't have very much for the sides, then that's all right. The same is true if you are doing an arrangement for your home, particularly for the dining room table. What the guests look at is more important than what you and your husband look at on either end of the table. So always work your center first. It is said that Renoir actually arranged his flowers, went to the garden and picked the flowers and arranged them and then painted them. One of my favorite flower artists is Fantin Latour, and it is said that he too painted flowers from life, unlike the Dutch and Flemish masters. In other words, he would go to the garden and very quickly, before they faded, he would paint the flowers. Supposedly, he painted very rapidly. So that was great. So that side's coming along. And now we'll have to take care of the ends, putting in just a few to do a little bit of finishing. And we do have a couple of lilies for the people who are pouring to look at, which is important. Another thing to think about in flower arrangement is dominance. Dominance means one thing most important, one idea, and it's easy to see how to achieve dominance, and that, of course, is through repetition. Repeating again and again the colors, the sizes, perhaps the forms. It is easy to see how to achieve it, and it could be very boring without a little bit of contrast. So we introduce contrast in flower arranging by line direction. We have some things going up and some things going out, and we also introduce contrast in form. The lily is different, for example, from the chrysanthemum. And we also think about rhythm or movement in design. And I feel that the rhythm in a symmetrically balanced design, actually, you get most of your rhythm through the placement of your flowers, the forward and backward idea, so that the eye goes into the design. And I think it's just about finished. Now, someone who is strong, I think Helen Dawson said she is strong. She's going to put this on the tea table.
Look, I'm carrying a pot of gold here.
And I hate to throw these in the trash, but they can be picked up later. I'll put them in carefully because, oh my, the microphone wanted to go too. So that is our first design. Our symmetrically balanced design. I wanted to talk just for a minute about the tools that I use, like any art or craft. There are certain things that are very, very useful. I use the needle holder, and we will use it in our next design a great deal. And I use the heaviest and largest needle holder that I possibly can, so that I will not have any problems in placing my plant material. I also use the Florian Tools. I think these are wonderful. We were in Pasadena recently enjoying Linda Teague's program, and there was a man out in the hall who was selling these tools. And I'm just devoted to these tools now. And this lopper is so great because I don't need very much brawn in order to cut heavy branches. And one of the nicest things is that that man said that any garden club member may take 10% off if you order any of his tools. So I brought some of his brochures in case you're interested. I'm going to put up the container a little bit. I think it'll fit on this. I have a little table here so that I will not have to bend over so far. Japanese flower arrangement, which is the other great influence in American design. The first is European, and Japanese is the other great influence, is the result of centuries of development based on the religions of Shintoism and Buddhism. Shintoism was the first religion in Japan, and it was a nature-oriented religion. There were many, many spirits, and there was a love of natural things, natural wood. And even now, you go to Japan and you see a great deal of this emphasis. In the 6th century, Buddhism traveled from India by way of China and Korea and came to rest in Japan. And in the 6th century, the Buddhist monks did floral designs as offerings in the temple. From a temple art in the 16th century, Japanese flower arrangement became a home art. And as you know, there are literally thousands of schools of Japanese flower arrangement. The theory behind all Japanese arrangements is that man identifies himself between heaven and earth. There is asymmetrical balance, not symmetrical. In Japan, you rarely see symmetrical balance. I'm going to be using an old Japanese bronze container, very beautiful container. It even has little lotus buds for feet. And I'm going to use a piece of palm fiber so that my needle holder will not scratch my container. It might scratch. And also, if I put water in this, then it will not slip around. I will not arrange in water during this demonstration because of time. Usually I do arrange in water, but because of time, I will not. I'm going to be using Proteus and Leucodendron. Please notice the lovely color relationship, the stems of the Leucodendron and the color of the Protea. Very, very beautiful. Now we're going to do asymmetrical balance. There are no rules in flower arrangement. You must remember that. There are only certain design principles that we apply. And we are going to do an asymmetrical design suggested by the Japanese. In looking over my material, I think that I will select a nice, strong piece of the Leucodendron as what I call my main line. And one proportion that is helpful to remember is that the plant material should be a minimum of 1.5 times the largest dimension of the container plus the depth. This is not a rule, it is just a help. This is a beauty, isn't it? Wonder if it's long enough. I don't try these ahead, so I will just have to bear with me. Maybe that's too long. This one looks like it would be all right, and it's so pretty, isn't it? Now, another helpful guideline is that the tip of the main line in American flower arranging usually should be just about over the place where the branch leaves the container, more or less. One problem with Leucodendron and all the Proteus, they have a tendency to want to jump out of the needle holder. It's very annoying, but they do. They're heavy stems. Now, does that look like it's fairly straight up? And isn't it lovely the way it curves? So we're going to put that first placement in. Our secondary will be approximately 2/3 to 3/4 of number 1. And this is approximately. And we'll put this over to one side and lean it toward my shoulder a little bit because we want to achieve third dimension or depth. Then our third placement will be approximately 1/2 of number 1. So that we have 3 placements, asymmetrical balance. And there they are. Now, we place these so that there is space for our flowers. And let's look at the flowers and decide which ones to use. We certainly won't need all of these, but they're so beautiful, I didn't know which ones I would choose, so I brought them all. We have some extra flowers for sale. I suppose some of you have discovered those, and very lovely they are. We will place one of our flowers so that it kind of looks up at our heaven line or our main line. which is already listing to one side, but we'll make him stand up in a minute. Sometimes if you make a cut up straight, cut your material on a slant, these heavy stems, that will help you to impale the material on the needle holder. You need strong hands to be a flower arranger, believe me. And we'll let him stand there. And some of the foliage seems like we don't need quite as much, so we'll clip a little out. And I'll turn this around for a minute while I select another flower. Probably 3 flowers will be all we'll need, if that many. Flowers die because of transpiration, and that simply means losing the water from petals and leaves. And of course, we want to make our flowers last as long as possible. Do use a preservative of some kind. The American Horticultural Society says if you have nothing else, use 1 part lemon lime soda, not the diet kind, but the other kind, and 1 quart of water, and then add about a half a teaspoon of Clorox to the mixture. The reason for the Clorox is to retard the growth of the bacteria. I use Harmex sometimes, a few drops of Harmex. I bought that one time when in order to root some cuttings, and then I read in fine print that it also would be helpful in preserving flowers. So I tried it and I used that. But the florist sells preservatives also. And any of the preservatives do help. I like to cut my material in the late afternoon when the flowers are full of sugar, and in that way they are ready for a good drink. And then what I do is bring them in the house and put them in deep water and let them drink overnight. And if I have a preservative, I use the preservative in the drinking water. Then the next day, I do the arrangements. I'm trying to make this all the way around. Actually, Japanese flower arrangements, you should stand 3 feet in front of, or kneel if they're in the tokonoma. And American flower arrangements based on Japanese tradition, you should view the same way. An asymmetrical design looks better viewed in this way. And this is the front, this flower. If you will, if I may direct your attention over to the wall, you will notice that the Heliconia arrangement in the black rectangular container on a little stand with the black bamboo, this first one, Heliconia and Birds, is based on this same asymmetrical triangle. In order to cover my mechanics, I have some wonderful stones from a volcano that a friend gave me. And the stones are so pretty that I love to have them in the container and look at them. As I put them in, down went one of the lines. Into the trash. All this is good trash, though, and can be rescued. The Japanese have given us a word called shibui, which means something that's understated, something that has beauty, an inner beauty, something that we feel, we recognize it when we see it, but it's hard to describe. I have an old Japanese container that I'm going to use, which I think is beautiful, but I don't know that everybody would think it's beautiful, but we will see. I know Linda Teague likes it. It's an old bucket, Japanese bucket, and it's all worn, you know, it just has a history. We wish it could talk. And in the container, we're going to use a cup holder. This is a nice, heavy holder. And I have to figure where I can put it because the bottom is all warped. And the material that we're going to use is one of the leucodendrons. This I grow in my yard. It's called Leucodendron Galpini, and I think it's beautiful. Isn't that nice with those little cones? And we hope it will behave in this arrangement. We will try picking up one side of the old bucket. And let's look for a nice lower line. This has a beautiful growth habit, and these little cones stay on all the time. They just never seem to do anything, but they don't bloom or anything. They just grow and produce these little cones, and they do dry. So more or less that will be our line. And we have just a few lilies, which I thought might be nice. We'll use the smaller ones kind of at the top and the larger ones down low. And fill in a little bit with the Galpini down low. Do a little bit of grooming, taking off the pods, which the leaves that are discolored, and adding a few more lilies. Another little gadget I like is called a stripper. I mean, not the usual kind of stripper you're familiar with, but a stem stripper, which is great. It's a rose stripper. Takes off the thorns. And I find it very useful in flower arranging because it saves my hands. And we'll turn this around in just a minute so that you can see what's going on. Very simple, quick arrangement with just the lilies contrasting to the rather feathery texture of the Galpini. And we have something for the back. I like to finish my arrangements all the way around, if at all possible. And this needle holder has quite a lot of needles. So I guess that's about it. We'll put one thing in the center. I just bought, I had an expensive walk the other day in La Jolla. Went by the place called Next to Nature. That's the name of the shop. It's a basket shop. And I saw this in the window, and I had to have it naturally. The clerk thought it was an old Korean lunchbox. And I just happened to have the perfect material for it. Isn't this beautiful? This is red gem Leucodendron, and the beautiful pink proteus, and the buds and foliage of another protea. And the color really attracted me a great deal. Note the contrast in the textures. These are beautiful, beautiful proteas. The mechanics are that we cut down a plastic container, and on top of the plastic container, so that we put oasis, and on top of the oasis I placed palm fiber so that you would not see the oasis. I like to mask my mechanics as early as I can so that I'm not disturbed by oasis. You remember in the mass arrangement, you saw that mound of retrofractus fern. That was fern cut in very short pieces. This is really a beautiful old bucket, and I know I'll enjoy having it. It's not in good shape, you know, it's all cracked, but it's shabooey. I would like to direct your attention to a pair of Japanese containers over on the side in the center. I think those also are very shabooey. They are made of wormwood, in other words, wood that has been eaten by the worms and brought up from the sea. I have done a contemporary arrangement, actually, in the old containers. The arrangement consists of bamboo and heliconia primarily. Almost every home has a basket, I would venture to say, and baskets were one of man's earliest inventions, actually, because they were at first used for carrying and storing. They have been found in Egyptian tombs, in Peruvian burial sites, and of course in the Indian cliff dwellings. In Japan, when flower arranging became so very, very popular as an art form, the basket makers tried to make baskets as beautiful and intricate as the arrangements. And this is an old Japanese basket. I imagine it's like two pair of gourds, but they're only one basket has a hole. I have placed a little tin can inside and used oasis and have just simply followed the sweep and the linear silhouette of the basket in the arrangement with the proteas, which are of course kind of a green-white with tipped with black, the black repeating the black of the sticks, and there's also a little brown touch, a little subtle touch. And do you notice how the feeling of the basket is repeated by the flowers themselves? Very easy, quick design. It lasts quite a long time. Now let's go back to symmetrical balance again, and this time we will use a lovely glass container by an artist in Leucadia. His name is Joel Bloomberg. Oh, that's water, huh? It's all right. A little water won't hurt the garden club's cloths, I hope. I want the glass to show some, so we will not hide it completely. I have used a needle holder in the bottom and oasis on the top, because when I tipped it over, I didn't want the oasis to fall out. I did spill the water, but the oasis did not fall out. On top of the oasis, I placed a piece of cheesecloth so that I can get the oasis out of the needle holder later. I'm going to use a few orchids. And a little bit of fern, and a little bit of caspia, which is very dainty. Everything is dainty, and we want to be sure that the orchids are important. First thing we will do is divide our space. This design is going to be for a table, and we won't go much over our fingertips. First, line in nice and straight. Then we will take two pieces of our plant material, which are cut the same length, and put one on one side and one on the other. Oh, that's all right, they'll be used. This is the same arrangement which we did for the tea table, but now it's going to be for the dining room table. And we will use those little short ones. One on one side and one on the other. So there we have our spreading triangle or pyramid. Now I think I'll put the orchids in first, because I don't want to hide them with our greens. It may be we will use very few greens. We'll see, because these are so lovely. And we want our guests to enjoy them. And we will add now a little of the caspia. Notice the little bit of contrast that we're adding, the contrast of the caspia to the little orchids, but we don't want to hide them, so we're being very careful about the placement, so that they are still very visible. Then we still have a few flowers left, and we just can't bear not to use them, so maybe we will tuck them in here and there. And this arrangement should last pretty well, because these little orchids do last extremely well. Those of you who have been to Hawaii, and I'm sure most of you have, you see them growing in hedges almost. It's unbelievable. And actually, I have a plant at home, and it's the third year, and this year it has 7 blooms on it. So they can be grown at home also. And I don't think I will use any of the fern. I think it'll make it a little bit too heavy. So, very simple little table piece. I Sometimes we are inspired by the things that we pick up on walks, and this happens to me quite often. One of the pieces of plant material that I think is so beautiful that either falls off or is cut off the trees is the palm. And I made a container at the end, which you might like to look at now or later, using the palm fronds or spathes, whatever they are called, and I covered a cylinder with palm fiber in order to hold the banksias. But I used one piece of the palm as a base and then one going up. I feel there's a very pleasing rhythm going on in the design. The movement of the palm is really quite nice. And the banksia adds a very pleasing note of contrast. Another container that I think is kind of unusual is a new acquisition also. This one is of natural materials. This time, this is a piece of slate, I guess. Panache, the gift shop in La Jolla Village Square, has a collection of these, and I didn't know which one to pick. I had to have one. And someone has very cleverly taken pieces of slate and other material and cut a hole, and glued a glass brick. In order that I can put water to the top, and I'm not sure that the joining of the glass brick, would be perfect. It might not be perfect. I cut Nancy's yogurt down and then put my needle holder in, and it just fits, which is nice. The glass brick bothered me some, so I glued some palm fiber, which I like better than the glass brick. This time we will use material from the garden, all from my garden, and do a very simple arrangement using the beautiful Alphonse Carr bamboo. This is a striped bamboo. I really like it a lot. It's a clump bamboo, so it doesn't travel too much. Travels a little, but not so much. Bamboo has a hollow stem, and the Chinese felt that the hollow stem was one to receive knowledge. So I think that's a very nice thought. The bamboo, of course, is much revered in China and in Japan. You will notice that I use the Wall Street Journal bags quite a lot in conditioning greens. Now, when I cut the bamboo, I brought it in the house and I sprayed it and I put it in the Wall Street Journal bags. So you need to subscribe to the Dow Jones Wall Street Journal. I'm using, for contrast, a piece of the variegated flax, which is very, very lovely, which repeats the striping of the bamboo. And then we have another piece of flax, which is more or less green and white, or kind of a cream colored. Bamboo lasts a long time in the house. I haven't had this container very long, but the arrangement was in the house for almost 3 weeks. Then I'm going to use a little bit of the aspidistra. So that's my main line so far. And we'll use a little bit of the aspidistra in the front, showing the front and the back. And this is a cuba, which I think is very beautiful. It's the gold dust plant. And maybe we'll use it as is. I'll see. I cut this and didn't try it, so bear with me. But it looked like it would be pretty in this container. It looked like it belonged. So we will see how it behaves. It looks pretty good. Notice how the akuba repeats the coloring in the bamboo and also the other flax and the aspidistra. It has a tendency to jump out. Of course, it never jumps out if you're at home. It only jumps out when you are lecturing. Then we have another piece, which is nice too. That maybe can go on the other side. So we will try it. And that shows a little bit of the other side of the plant material, which is interesting. I like to show all aspects of a flower or plant material, the front and the back, because often the back is very, very interesting as well as the front. Now we'll do something for the back, and I think that's probably enough. Sometimes a container is extremely sculptural, and I feel that the containers by the artist Shirley Kimsey are in that category. And certainly this is a very beautiful sculptural container. In deciding what to use, I did not want to hide the container, but I wanted to draw attention to the container. And I picked this piece of kelp up on the beach one day, and it had been in the driveway for a while drying, and so I thought, well, how would you look in the container? And I think it looks great. Now, usually I do not anchor my material, like kelp, I just put it on. But because I was doing this program, I did glue it in a couple of places. A glue gun is another mechanical aid for flower arrangers. And if you don't have one, you might find it useful if things are going to travel. For contrast in texture, against the very, very smooth container, I've used the Banksia and a pine-like foliage that I do not know the name of, which also came from my friend Bill T, but it is quite beautiful. Then accent and contrast again the two green leaves. We have another very sculptural container by the same artist, Shirley Kimsey, and this time I've used this seaweeds, whatever it is, or kelp. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but I thought that it would offer a very nice contrast to the container and repeat a little bit of the orange. There's a little bit of orange in the gray container, if you look carefully. Some of the kelp or seaweed I have used right side up, and some I have used upside down. I did not want to hide the container too much. I wanted you to be conscious of the artist, so I accented the arrangement with the lovely orange lilies. Again, a note of contrast. Some years ago, I saw a piece of sculpture in a magazine, and I sent it to Shirley Kimsey. And I said, make me a container that has the same feeling as this piece of sculpture. And a month or two later, I received this container, and I think it's wonderful. I love the container. And the dried material is wisteria. This is peeled wisteria, which has been painted, of course. And the emphasis in this design, I think, is on rhythm and space. And the anthurium just seemed to be dancing around the very interesting container. Again, the container itself should be important, so we do not hide it. Aspidistra leaves are the leaves that I have used. Another discovery I made when I came to California was eucalyptus bark. I think eucalyptus bark is so wonderful. The texture is so great. This is another Shirley Kimsey container, which has holes in it. It just wants that eucalyptus bark. This time I did glue the eucalyptus bark, but it came undone, but it's staying. Let's hope it stays through the program. Notice that the holes in this bark repeat these holes in the container, and the color and the texture are most compatible. We will use some birds and a little papyrus in the design and see how it turns out. That eucalyptus bark, you must behave. Using the papyrus first, there's oasis in the container. Picking up the main line of the container, and maybe another one. And then we'll start our birds pretty quickly. Papyrus is from Marie Schwalbach, and it really is beautiful. The angles of the container kind of repeat the angles, of the birds. So I think birds are a very good choice for this particular container. This container does not belong to me. It belongs to Marnie Austin, my friend. I appreciate the use of it. The rest of the containers are mine, but this one she did lend me for the program. And we'll use a few of the bird leaves. And maybe we can use another bird. We'll see. It's nice that there's a couple of places that I can put that bird. She left a little space for me, which is helpful. And maybe come back with our papyrus down low. maybe a bird in the back. I'm a great believer in finishing our back if possible. And I guess that's enough. I'm getting crowded. Sometimes a ceramic artist will imitate nature. And this time we have a gourd container, which we have used with ginger and painted branches of something that I bought many years ago in New York City. I painted them after I bought them. They were from a Japanese store, but they come all curled up, and then you wet them and straighten them out and recurl them. So the black container with the red ginger with the unusual curling bits of the whatever this material is makes kind of an interesting design. We have suggested this afternoon that flower arrangement, like other arts, is based on tradition, but like other arts, it is guided by the design principles. It's been a pleasure this afternoon to share my philosophy of flower arranging. Thank you.